The story begins with a moment that, at first glance, seems like routine political remarks from a sitting US president. But behind the brief exchange between Donald Trump and reporters lies a much wider geopolitical landscape, a picture shaped by military deployments, covert maritime operations, contested legitimacy, and a deepening confrontation between Washington and Caracas. As Trump stepped toward the press that morning, his body language gave away little, yet his words carried substantial weight. When asked about Venezuela, the president hinted almost casually that the United States may be having some conversations with Maduro. It was a short statement, but it was loaded with implications for a region already on edge. This was not the first time the United States had sent powerful signals toward Venezuela. Over the preceding months, the American military had steadily built a presence in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific, deploying warships and aircraft in what officials described as a broad operation targeting drug trafficking networks. But for many observers, particularly in Latin America, the timing, scale and intensity of the deployment raised deeper questions. Was this truly about narcotics, or was it part of a larger political and strategic confrontation with the Venezuelan government, one Washington no longer recognized as legitimate? Trump's comment, brief as it was, seemed to open a new chapter. Until then, his administration had taken one of the hardest lines against Nicolás Maduro, labeling him a dictator, imposing punishing sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, and endorsing opposition leader Juan Guaidó as the rightful president. The idea of conversation signaled a potential shift. And yet it came on a day defined by military action, not diplomacy. Just hours earlier, US Southern Command released footage showing another lethal strike at sea in the Eastern Pacific. American forces engaged a vessel they labeled a drug trafficking boat. The attack, according to official statements, left 3 people, dead individuals, the US accused of operating within transnational criminal networks. It was one of more than 20 similar operations carried out since September, part of a sweeping naval campaign that Washington argued was essential to stopping narcotics before they reached North America. But the campaign's brutality raised serious scrutiny. According to publicly available figures compiled by AFP, at least 83 people had been killed by US forces in these maritime strikes. Although Washington described them all as traffickers, it had not presented evidence confirming the identities of those killed. For human rights observers and regional governments, the absence of transparency was troubling. Many questioned whether these operations were truly narrow counter-narcotics actions or whether they served a parallel political objective, pressuring the Venezuelan government militarily, even without direct confrontation. The deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford further intensified speculation. As the US Navy's most advanced and powerful aircraft carrier, its presence in the Caribbean sent a potent message. The carrier strike group included guided missile destroyers, support ships, and additional aircraft, forming the backbone of a force capable of executing large-scale operations. It joined other combat vessels already patrolling the region, creating one of the largest U.S. maritime concentrations near Venezuela in years. For Venezuelan officials, this was unmistakably a direct threat. The government in Caracas condemned the operations repeatedly, arguing that the United States was edging dangerously close to a justification for military intervention. Maduro maintained that his government had no ties to drug trafficking and accused Washington of manufacturing narratives to justify aggression. At the same time, Venezuela strengthened its own military posture, conducting exercises, showcasing new weaponry, and pushing legislation designed to consolidate domestic defense authority. It was during this tense atmosphere that Maduro appeared on Venezuelan state television, signing a national defense law aimed at reinforcing the country's sovereignty. His message to the nation was defiant, emphasizing that Venezuela would not bow to external pressure from what he described as imperial interests. Back in the United States, the political rhetoric surrounding Venezuela escalated further. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, one of the most influential voices on Latin American policy, stated that Washington intended to designate a drug cartel associated with Maduro's circle as a foreign terrorist organization. Rubio's remarks reflected a sharpening strategy if Maduro could not be removed through sanctions or political isolation. Perhaps labeling key actors as terrorists would open new legal channels for U.S. action. At the heart of the story lies a contradiction that defined U.S.-Venezuela relations in this period. Trump's administration insisted that Maduro was not the legitimate president of Venezuela, yet Trump himself openly acknowledged on camera that the U.S. might soon be speaking with him. This raised a central question. How does one negotiate with someone whose authority one does not recognize? The comment left diplomats, analysts and regional observers scrambling to interpret what had changed. Did Washington believe Maduro was willing to offer concessions? Was the U.S. leadership moving toward realism after years of failed attempts to force political change? Or was this an improvised remark by a president often described as unpredictable? Understanding the significance of Trump's statement requires looking beyond the single moment and examining the broader context shaping U.S. foreign policy. For decades, Venezuela has been a focal point of ideological struggle in the Western Hemisphere. Once one of Latin America's richest nations, Venezuela descended into economic crisis after years of political upheaval, corruption, mismanagement, and collapsing oil prices. The United States and several European and Latin American countries placed the blame squarely on Maduro, accusing him of dismantling democratic institutions and presiding over widespread human rights violations. Washington's recognition of Juan Guaidó in 2019 was a major diplomatic maneuver, part of a coordinated effort to force Maduro from office. But by 2025, that strategy had stalled. Guaidó's political momentum weakened, international recognition became fragmented, and Maduro remained firmly in control of the military and state apparatus. Against this backdrop, Washington's maritime campaign emerged as a powerful alternate tool, one that projected force without formally declaring conflict. Still, the operations raised new concerns. Many Caribbean and Latin American governments expressed unease about the presence of American warships so close to their territorial waters. Some feared the potential for miscalculation or accidental escalation. Others accused Washington of using the war on drugs as a pretext. Drug trafficking networks in the region are extensive, but critics argued that the U.S. focus appeared unusually concentrated around areas of strategic interest to Venezuela. As American forces carried out additional strikes, each one resulting in more casualties, calls for accountability grew louder. International law experts questioned whether the operations complied with rules governing extraterritorial use of force. Families of those killed, many of whom remained unidentified publicly, had little recourse or information. And yet, the U.S. government insisted its campaign was saving lives by stopping deadly narcotics before they reached American streets. For Venezuelans, Trump's statement about potential talks offered both uncertainty and opportunity. On one hand, dialogue could ease tensions and potentially open channels for humanitarian relief. On the other, the threat of military pressure still loomed large. Maduro's government, heavily sanctioned and financially strained, frequently used perceived external threats to rally supporters and consolidate internal power. Any hint of negotiation with Washington risked appearing as a concession unless framed as a victory for national sovereignty. Inside the United States, political reactions varied. Some lawmakers expressed cautious optimism, arguing that direct communication, even with adversaries, was a practical step. Others saw Trump's remarks as inconsistent with his administration's hard-line policy. For them, engaging with Maduro risked undermining the American position that he was an illegitimate leader. The contradiction was difficult to ignore, especially as the EU continued offering a $50 million reward for Maduro's capture. As tensions swirled between diplomatic rhetoric and military firepower, the USS Gerald Ford continued its operations at sea. On its deck, fighter jets awaited orders, symbolized the power that the United States could project at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, U.S. Southern Command released more footage of maritime interdictions, images that dominated conversations across Latin America. For many viewers, these clips brought the reality of the situation into sharp focus. High-speed boats, explosions at sea, and the stark aftermath of deadly engagements. The psychological impact of seeing warship operations so close to Venezuelan waters was profound. For decades, Latin America had been shaped by U.S. military interventions, from Central America to the Caribbean. The memory of those historical interventions lingered in regional consciousness. The new naval buildup rekindled old debates about sovereignty, self-determination, and the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. Against this backdrop, Maduro's televised appearances gained symbolic significance. When he lifted the newly signed defense law and addressed the nation, he framed the moment as a response to what he described as imperial aggression. His speech emphasized unity, resilience, and national dignity. For his supporters, it was a message of strength. For opponents, a reminder of the government's tightening control. Yet, even as political tensions rose, the situation remained fragile. Venezuela's economic crisis continued to push citizens to migrate by the millions. Entire communities faced food shortages, collapsing healthcare systems, and widespread inflation. While Washington's pressure campaign aimed to weaken Maduro, many experts warned that sweeping sanctions and military posturing risked worsening humanitarian suffering. In the days following Trump's remarks, analysts debated what conversations with Maduro might look like. Would they be direct negotiations, back-channel discussions, or merely exploratory contacts? The ambiguity left room for speculation. Some believed the U.S. hoped to secure a commitment from Maduro regarding drug trafficking, networks real or alleged. Others suspected Washington wanted to prevent deeper alliances between Venezuela and adversarial global powers like Russia, Iran, or China, all of which had expanded ties with Caracas. Meanwhile, within the United States, Trump's political advisors understood the domestic stakes. Foreign policy has long played a role in American presidential politics, and strong actions against narcotics trafficking traditionally resonate with voters. A military campaign framed as protecting American communities from deadly drugs could bolster support, even if reality on the ground was more complex. The suggestion of talks with Maduro could also be positioned as part of a broader diplomatic strategy, portraying Trump as a leader willing to explore every avenue to safeguard U.S. interests. For Venezuela, the geopolitical environment was equally complicated. Maduro's government faced pressure not only from Washington, but also from segments of the Venezuelan diaspora, independent human rights organizations, and regional blocs such as the Organization of American States. Domestic opposition groups, though weakened, continued pressing for political change. Maduro's challenge was maintaining authority while projecting strength internationally. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed reporters at an airport in Canada shortly after Trump's remarks, his tone underscored the administration's dual-track approach. While acknowledging potential diplomatic avenues, Rubio reinforced that the U.S. viewed the Venezuelan drug cartel as a terrorist organization in waiting. His statement was a reminder that Washington's posture, though open to discussion, remained fundamentally adversarial. The aircraft, the warships, the televised addresses, and the deadly maritime strikes all contributed to a tense, uncertain moment in hemispheric affairs. And as viewers followed each new update, whether through official channels, social media, or state-run broadcasts, they witnessed a story unfolding simultaneously on diplomatic, military, and political fronts. Throughout this period, expert voices frequently cautioned that escalation could carry immense risk. A large-scale confrontation between the United States and Venezuela would have unpredictable consequences across Latin America, a region already grappling with economic challenges, migration crises, and political polarization. Caribbean nations, many of which rely heavily on maritime trade and tourism, voiced concerns that naval conflict could disrupt vital shipping routes or spill over into their territorial waters. Yet, despite multiple dangerous flashpoints, neither side appeared willing to retreat fully. The United States continued to assert its right to combat drug trafficking using military force. Venezuela continued to defend its sovereignty, arguing that Washington was manufacturing pretexts to destabilize the region. And Trump's ambiguous comment about discussions with Maduro left analysts unsure whether the situation was poised to escalate or whether it marked the first small step toward diplomatic de-escalation. In long-form analysis, the significance of the moment lies not only in the words spoken, but in the overlapping strategies that shape them. Military deployments projected strength, maritime operations demonstrated capability, public statements set tone. And behind the scenes, each side weighed the political costs of confrontation against the practical necessity of engagement. What remained clear was that the story was far from over. The United States continued expanding its naval posture. Venezuela continued responding with new laws and political messaging. And the people caught in the middle, migrants, coastal communities, regional sailors, and everyday Venezuelans continued living with the uncertainty of what might come next. As the narrative moved forward, global audiences watched closely. The potential for diplomatic dialogue coexisted with active military pressure. Analysts remained divided. Some predicted negotiations, others warned of sustained tension or even covert confrontation. But the coming months would reveal whether Trump's offhand remark marked a meaningful turning point or simply another fleeting moment in a conflict defined by contradiction, intensity, and immense geopolitical complexity.